Welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. I'm here at the News Forum, where all voices matter. I'd like to welcome back the monthly panel to Boom and Bust. From trade to inflation, there's a lot to talk about. So let's welcome the panel. Joe Oliver was Finance Minister and also Natural Resources Minister in the Stephen Harper government. And welcome back to Sandra Pupatello. She was Trade Minister in the Ontario government. And of course, welcome to Gary Mar, who had a career as an Alberta cabinet minister and also agent in Washington and Asia, and is now head of the Canada West Foundation. Welcome to all of you. It's great to have you here. So I do have to ask my obligatory post-election questions since the dust is starting to settle. What do you see as Canada's economic challenges post-election? Joe, we'll go to you first.
Well, I don't want to be a one-trick pony, but clearly we have a real fiscal challenge, and inflation is up, growth is down, debt is extremely high, and we don't seem to have a growth strategy. So there's concerns about how we're going to be able to cope with that fiscal challenge, and whether there will be on the horizon some big tax bites. I'm not sure whether the government is ready for that. I don't think that the NDP got that much traction on the soap the rich plans, and if the Liberals are planning, as the Prime Minister implied, to potentially face the public again in as little as 18 months. I doubt that he would want to do something which would imperil his political prospects even greater than they already have been. So we've got a House, reconvening that isn't very happy.
Right.
Everybody seems to have lost one way or another, but no one is going to bring down the government in the short term. So the Liberals will have an opportunity to get some of their agenda through, and there'll be just more spending, but they're going to have to be careful about how they go about it, because they don't have an overwhelming mandate. In fact, there are fewer people who voted for this government than any other government in Canadian history.
I want to go to Gary Mar next. Gary, oil is up. The price of oil has rebounded somewhat. Maybe it's supply chain issues and also economies starting to get back to normal. What do you see as the big challenges for post-election government?
Well, it's not just the price of oil. The last time I checked, West Texas Intermediate was at about $76 a barrel. This is certain circumstances could cause this to go in excess of 90. But also the price of natural gas. And the last time I checked, it was $5.50 Henry Hub price. And it's October. It's not even cold yet. So you could see the price of natural gas going up perhaps to $10 or $12, at Henry Hub price. So I think that it's not necessarily a sign that the economy is recovering. So much has been that there has been so little money put into the development of new resources. It's very, very difficult to acquire the capital to develop new sources, and so the supply is low. I think that's what's driving the price, not necessarily the demand.
Right.
We've got huge issues in Europe right now. I think Joe referred to that the last time that we were on. You look in places like the UK, 30% of their petrol stations don't have any petrol in them. You've got natural gas prices going through the roof. You've got the United States begging for oil from other places like Saudi Arabia. It's ironic that the president would end Enbridge, or not Enbridge Line 5, but KXL, about 850,000 barrels a day. Just coincidentally, that's the amount of oil that the United States is currently importing from the Russian Federation.
Affordability, I'm sure, was one of the major issues that you were picking up on. Is that right?
Well, it was. And I live in Windsor. I'm sitting in Windsor right now, a border community that's had its own challenges through the pandemic. So I think we would like to see the federal government focusing on getting the border open with our largest neighbor. That impacts our economy in the biggest way. For half the economy, service, restaurants,
Okay, well,
tourism.
I'm gonna cut you off. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with our panel. Joe Oliver is with us, Sandra Pupatello, Gary Marr. Sandra, I had to cut you off, but I think it is an important point, what you're hearing and how you think the government has to grapple with some of these affordability issues. So please continue.
Well, we know that we've talked, intermittently about how half the economy has started churning again right away, and the other half has really been lagging. And when half your economy is tourism or the service industry, it's been really a struggle, especially for border communities. So to my way of thinking, the government has to make sure those businesses survive so that as the Americans finally decide they're going to allow Canadians to cross and vice versa, our companies are still existing, because right now I think lots are right on the edge. And despite all the help the federal government has been, which has been tremendous in my view, we've got a lot of companies that are really struggling. Restaurants at half capacity still, mandates coming and going across the country. So I think we've got a big challenge. Let's help our companies survive, number one. Get the border open, number two, and then figure out what's our growth strategy to start trading with the world again. And I hope in that order, that's in fact what the government will focus on.
So do you think that one of the topics that the Liberals should tackle right away, the federal Liberals, is talking to President Biden about opening the border then?
Well, and I know that that's continued. Obviously the election made it a little difficult to keep the talks going because there was a lot of activity that was government in nature, whether there was an election or not. And Afghanistan is an example of that. Now that people are getting back into their positions, I think we need to restart the talks. That I appreciate the Americans need to keep a border closed at the south end of their country. That does not apply at the north end. And we've managed to keep essential business flowing. It's time to keep the northern border open for people, and that's going to have a huge impact. We hear from the Michigan companies that are suffering because the Canadians are not going there. And thankfully, Canadians are traveling within their own country, so I think they're helping our Canadian companies to survive. Our reality is that we're a trading nation in every industry, whether that's the wine industry, which we have in abundance in Essex County, or restaurants, tourism generally. We need trade, and certainly our automotive and manufacturing sector. They've been suffering other challenges like the supply chain issues that you referenced earlier, Tony. That we need to get a handle on how we smooth out these supply chains so that we can produce the cars that people are desperate to buy. And right now, our car companies are able to buy a very expensive car with very few rebates that are required to convince consumers to purchase. So that's a sweet spot they haven't been in for probably 20 years that we've been watching them. So let's get the car built. And that means we need to fix our supply chain issues as well.
Gary, I'd like to switch gears and ask you, obviously, I guess one of the big post-election stories was the release of the two Michaels from custody in China. Where do you see Canada-China relations going now?
Everybody that I talk to on this subject says we just don't know. I mean, hopefully we return to some form of normalcy. I think it's important for Canada to stand up for the kinds of values that Canadians believe in, while at the same time, we need to be able to engage in trade. And we can see what happens if China doesn't like what you have to say. We have to be prepared to endure what Australia is going through. But China, on the other hand, needs energy. And so we have the capacity to use energy as our big bargaining chip in dealing with China. I think it's important that to know that you can run away from China, but you'll always run into China. So just saying we're not going to trade with China isn't going to work, because take commodities that are grown in Western Canada, canola, instead of going directly to China, will be bought by some intermediary in the UAE and then transshipped to China. So That's not a practical solution either. So we need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, to be engaged on the issues that are important to Canadians, while at the same time, allowing the private sector to make its assessment as to where it can make the most money by trading its commodities, be it China or elsewhere, if they are able to diversify their marketplaces.
We'll keep this conversation going after the break. I want to hear definitely from Joe Oliver on that. And also we've got another couple of hot topics that are in the news as well. So please stay with us. We'll be back after the break, and we'll have this panel with you for the duration. Thanks for watching. And we're back here at Boom Bust with the monthly panel. Joe Oliver is with us, as well as Sandra Pupatello and Gary Marr. And I guess, Joe, I'd love to get your thoughts. Gary talked a little bit about the sort of the post-China-Canada relationship with the release of the two Michaels. But what are your thoughts on this matter?
Look, now that the euphoria and relief has somewhat subsided, although the two Michaels are going to have to deal with the psychological side effects likely for some time, in spite of their remarkable resilience. I think it's time for a rethink of our China relationship, and that has to be done in the context of our national interest and our values. We have to understand realistically, without illusions, what China really is. And then understand the implications for our national security, for our trade, for our international alliances, for our sovereignty, even for our identity. There was a belief for some time, a lot of people had, that as China became wealthier, it would become more progressive, more democratic. Well, that hope has been dashed. Also, there was a view that maybe as it became wealthier, it would become a little bit more of a free enterprise system. And it's pretty clear that President Xi Jinping is really an acolyte of Mao Zedong without the extreme cultural revolution. So we have to understand who they are. And that means there's some things that we can't do, shouldn't do, and some things that we can. We shouldn't have a free trade agreement with them. We shouldn't allow Huawei to use its equipment in 5G network. But we can do some trade, in particular natural resources. We only learn how to deliver, because we don't have the pipeline capacity to tide water to do that, which is a national tragedy. And we have to also make sure that we're a robust and reliable partner to the United States and the alliance that it has with other countries in the Asia Pacific area. We're not part of the Quad. We're not part of AUKUS, which is the new arrangement between the UK, the United States, and Australia. I guess we're not viewed as a particularly robust or reliable on issues related to China. And some say we're not that reliable in terms of keeping confidences. So this is not a good thing. So China is a huge country. It's 1.4 billion people. It's the second largest economy, and it's our second largest trading partner. But when you say that, understand that it's still 1/12 of the trade that we do with the United States. Mm-hmm. So while it's important, it's not overwhelming, and we have to pick and choose and pursue our national interests in a very cold and objective way. And we also have to stand for our principles and speak out about the genocide against the Uyghurs, about the continual harassment of the Falun Gong, about the decline of democracy in Hong Kong, about the threats to Taiwan. This is a very multifaceted relationship.
So I just want to make sure that Sandra has a chance to,
Sure.
you got about just over a minute before the break, Sandra.
To be honest, Tony, I'm feeling more hopeful than before.
Yeah.
The whole world turned its attention to Canada and what Canada was dealing with when our two Michaels were in jail in China. And a coalition of countries came together that had never happened before on any other issue related to China. And that was good. I think it was a wake-up call for China, and it had to have something to do with how they've suddenly responded now that the issue with Meng Wanzhou has diminished here in Canada. So suddenly they were released. And I think they saw that Canada was gaining traction. They were getting support from the UK, from the EU, from all over. And this to me is a symbol of what Joe Biden said in his inauguration, which dealing with China is not going to be just a US-China event. It's going to be China against the rest of us. And I hope he sticks to his word and that we as Canadians can encourage that kind of debate, because in my view, that's what's going to take when you're dealing with a country as large and as globally influential as China has become.
Indeed. Well, that is a great way to segue to our next break, of course, and we'll be back with another topic after the break. So please stay with us. We'll be right back. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. We're here with our monthly panel. We've got Joe Oliver with us, of course, and Gary Marr and Sandra Pupatello. Joe, I'll start with you. I guess one of the big news items recently has been the release of the Pandora Papers, the so-called Pandora Papers, where certainly the practices of the rich and famous and their ability to shelter assets in certain shelters was brought to the attention of the world again. What, if anything, should be done in your opinion?
Well, I mean, there are a number of aspects to it, but one is, who they found to try to skirt the tax laws, and they didn't find really any Canadians. And I think they found one who was behaving in a totally responsible and legal way, and there were very few Americans as well. Now, some may say, "Oh, that's because the American taxes are lower, so we don't have to cheat." Well, does that imply that when the taxes go up, they're going to start? I don't know that it's more titillating than real for Canada, but it does. There's no justification for what these people did, and I'm not particularly sad that they were outed at all. But clearly, when taxes reach a certain level, people start taking action, and the more unscrupulous among them will take illegal action. But there's something else that people haven't talked much about, and that is the dangers of hacking. This is an intrusion on privacy. We might not mind because we've uncovered illegality or at the minimum unethical behavior. But when millions of people's most sensitive financial documents are disclosed, there are issues about privacy which have much broader implications. And frankly, that's as Canadians what I'd be a little more concerned about than the tax side, which obviously very few Canadians, or if any, were involved in.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually, Gary. I'll throw it over to you. Is this just kind of business as usual and nothing burger, or is there something bigger at play here?
Well, it's interesting, Tony, that at the very outset you said that this was a disclosure of the practices of the famous and the wealthy. So, I checked into the papers and I noted that none of the four of us are on. So we are either neither wealthy nor are we famous. But I think we didn't
need that to uncover.
But I think the point is that it is not a nothing burger. I think that there were examples. For example, C.Y. Leung, who is the chief executive of the Hong Kong government, was found to have made a transaction that appeared to be one that was not, tax avoidance. He crossed the line into tax evasion. And for that reason, I think that we should be paying attention to this. And I'm glad to hear that Canadians and largely Americans are absent from the disclosure in these papers. But I think that, something has to be said for making sure that we don't want to have leakage in our tax system, that we do want, there's nothing wrong with tax avoidance, but tax evasion is something that should be actionable by the CRA if it's disclosed in the release of the Panama or the Pandora Papers.
Sandra, you got about 30 seconds left. Gary has proclaimed that we're all innocent, so that's good, but you've got 30 seconds.
It's like the Auditor General report. You just don't want to be in it. And I think when you are, you need to worry. If they're asking questions, there's nothing wrong with that. You better have a good answer. If it exposes people, in particular parliamentarians in parts of the world who are making laws, then you want to make sure they're actually upholding laws. So to me, I think it's good to see it. And I'm glad to see there are no Canadians being highlighted there. But I do think it speaks to CRA, take good lessons from this to help us create better laws, close loopholes, and let the Canadians be the recipients of good taxpayers' dollars.
Hear, hear. Well,
and enforcement.
And enforcement, absolutely. Well, I think we're in radical agreement here. I want to thank the panel for another month and wish them well. We'll see them next month for sure. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Well, lots of topics there, including the Pandora Papers and China and post-election issues from our panel. Always a great discussion with them. Thanks for watching. Of course, they will be back in November as we continue our discussions with them. Thanks again.